Tito was a revolutionary, and he saw the Second World War as a way of smashing up the old society. So what he wanted to do was to use resistance to the Germans to rally people to support what would essentially be the communist cause. And of course, he therefore didn't want to destroy the future basis of communist rule, the partisan army, in suicidal fighting against the Germans. He was waiting to be in a position to destroy his internal rivals, the other Yugoslav non-communist political groups. And that's what he was essentially planning for. He was very far-sighted.
Men who took the gallant decision to resist Nazi aggression.
Tito's objectives were not shared in Britain. In exile since the German invasion, King Peter and the Yugoslav government supported the anti-communist loyalists under Mihailovic. Inevitably, this meant that the British government also backed the anti-communist resistance.
Churchill wanted to set Europe ablaze with resistance, and so Britain supported whoever was going to fight against the Germans and sabotage their war effort, wherever that was. In Yugoslavia, Mihailovic had already planned to prepare a resistance to an occupation even before the war, so he was the natural person for the British to look to support.
In January 1943, Churchill visited Cairo. The meetings he held there were to prove decisive in changing British policy in Yugoslavia. Cairo was the regional headquarters of the Special Operations Executive, or SOE, the clearinghouse for intelligence reports from British liaison officers with Mihailovic in Yugoslavia. Churchill's attitude towards Mihailovic would be determined by the accuracy of their information. But former British liaison officers have since claimed that their reports to London were not accurately passed on.
I found serious inaccuracies in the reports to London and to army headquarters, which were just not consistent with the signals we were sending in. For example, I only found one of a total of, I think, about 8 operations which I had reported through went on to Cairo, went on to London.
Certain of my own signals, and I had direct access to Command-in-Chief Mediterranean, for example, which were dubious and critical of partisan, of communist activities, don't seem to have been received. Now, where they went, I don't know. I don't think my signals would have influenced any very high-level decisions, but there may have been other ones which did not get through or were suitably delayed, perhaps, or just mal-decoded. I wouldn't know, but I'm much more certain that there was a very, very unfriendly attitude towards BLOs who were with Mihailovic.
After the war, allegations were made that James Klugman, a junior officer in Cairo SOE, had been tampering with field reports about Mihailovic. Klugman had been involved with the pre-war Yugoslav Communist Party. His knowledge of Serbo-Croat gave him unique influence in Cairo SOE.
Anything that was good about General Mihailovic when it got to Klugman never got past him. It was either went in the waste paper basket or it was somehow downgraded.
Squadrons of tanks and their crews were drawn up.
It is not known whether Churchill's commitment to Mihailovic had been affected by the reports from Cairo. But during the time he was in Egypt, Churchill was given a top-secret briefing by senior SOE officers. When he left for London, Churchill had a memorandum summarizing SOE Cairo's views on the resistance forces in Yugoslavia. Among other things, Churchill had been told that partisans were pinning down far more enemy divisions than Mihailovic, not all partisan forces were communist inclined, and independent aid should be sent to the partisans so that resistance efforts could be raised to a level of real military value. On his return from the meeting with SOE in Cairo, Churchill lost little time in instructing SOE London, as a matter of the greatest importance, to establish contact with the communist partisans in Yugoslavia.
We got our first officers into Croatia in April, and they immediately began to send back large quantities of information. Deakin arrived in in May and got through the encirclement at the end of May into Bosnia in June, opened contact with us, and others were sent in, and I went myself in August.
In occupied Yugoslavia, Tito made a deep impression on William Deakin, whose dispatches to Cairo paid tribute to the courage of the partisan resistance.
Deakin was an academic. He wasn't a military man. And suddenly he was dropped into a really perilous and traumatic situation. The Tito headquarters was threatened with being surrounded. Under those circumstances, it's natural for a man to become overwhelmed and to regard the people he is with as wonderful friends.
He was highly impressed, as many British officers were, when in the course of their one great adventure in their lives, when they were being dropped by parachute over enemy territory, they came across men who were up against it, up in the mountains, eating, just to put it dramatically, dead horses and grass. And there's no question that Bill Deakin was much impressed by them, particularly because, in some respects, he was like them. He also was personally extremely brave.
And here,
in July 1943, Churchill had decided that he wanted a first-hand assessment of Tito's organization. The Cairo report he had been given 6 months before had obviously set him thinking about resistance in Yugoslavia. He summoned a Tory MP and former diplomat with experience of communist Russia to see him, Captain Fitzroy Maclean.
Churchill had said to me that my job was to find out who was doing the most harm to the Germans and how we could help them to do more.
Captain Maclean was promoted to brigadier to be Churchill's personal envoy to Tito. He was with the Partisans for only a few months. By November 1943, Maclean's report favouring Tito was in Churchill's hands. At the Tehran conference later that month, Churchill indicated to Stalin and Roosevelt that a switch in British policy on Yugoslavia was likely. Returning from Tehran, Churchill was to stop over in Cairo. There he was to be briefed on Yugoslavia. The two British officers with Mihailovic, Brigadier Armstrong and Colonel Bailey, had expected to meet him there. The Foreign Office had suggested the visit. But SOE Cairo had been unable to arrange it. In early December, the delegation from Tito's Partisans, together with Maclean and Deakin, did arrive in Cairo to brief Churchill. Further diplomatic business had welcomed the tired Churchill back to Cairo. The world's press captured his meeting with the president of neutral Turkey and the ailing Roosevelt. But Yugoslavia, and not Turkey and its neutrality, must have been uppermost in Churchill's thoughts. For Maclean had convinced him he should switch his allegiance from Mihailovic to Tito. Maclean had reported,
Tito's identity is kept a secret. He is known to be a man of the people and to have worked underground as a communist agent ever since the last war. Seems likely that he is, in fact, Joseph Bross, a Zagreb metal worker, who, after passing some years in the Soviet Union, was sent back to Yugoslavia by the Comintern in 1937 to reorganize and assume the leadership of the illegal Yugoslav Communist Party. As a leader, he enjoys the undivided devotion of his followers, for whom he has become a legendary figure. The military and political structure built up by Tito and his followers in 2 years, from nothing, in enemy-occupied territory with no outside help, is an impressive one. Much of what has been achieved is due to the traditional love of liberty of the people of Yugoslavia, and much to the leadership and ability of Tito.
but since the war, detailed aspects of Maclean's report have been criticized. Maclean had written that the latest information was that Tito had 220,000 fighting troops in the field, 10 to 20 times more than Mihailovic.
This is a very exaggerated figure. Even the Germans, who knew who they were fighting, estimated the partisans as being only about 3 times stronger than the Chetniks. And of course the Germans had an interest in propaganda terms in claiming that the resistance was organized by communists because they hoped to discredit it.
When Maclean was preparing that report, presumably in October, early November 43, Tito probably had about 60,000 men. And Mihailovic probably had about the same mobile forces.